Hello and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. We were last talking about global warming, and so we're going to continue talking about climate change and global warming, and we're going to go into a little bit of work on ocean acidification today. So, climate change, what is it? Well, that is the long-term change that results from global warming. So, global warming is the idea that the Earth's surface temperatures are increasing because of greenhouse gas emissions and because of the amplification of the greenhouse effect. Climate change, on the other hand, are the results of that. So, what do we see as a result of those things? So, obviously, we see increased temperatures, but what that is doing is it is changing the precipitation patterns. And so, we end up with a lot more droughts, heat waves, floods. Here are the areas of the state of California that were in a drought. Obviously, the darker it is and the more red it is, the worse the drought is. And even now, we're currently in a drought. So it does have a direct effect, though, on every area. And even if you're not in an area prone to drought, you might be in an area now that is prone to flooding and worse flooding as a result. We also have hurricanes that have become stronger and more frequent. Hurricanes are appearing earlier and earlier in the year. They are a lot more powerful and they're more numerous. The sea level is rising, which is causing damage and danger to areas where they are at sea level. So, Florida, Louisiana, that whole area is a lot more now prone to severe flooding because of sea level rise. Arctic ice melting, coral bleaching, ocean acidification, all of these are the result of global warming. And so, again, we're going to kind of move on then to coral bleaching and ocean acidification because it's a fairly interesting topic. And it's something that we don't get to talk a whole lot about normally. So, coral bleaching. First of all, what are coral and where do you find coral reefs? Coral reefs are found in tropical waters. So, the Great Barrier Reef is probably the most famous coral reef on Earth. Coral, though, are actually little sea anemone like organisms, and they have algae that live inside of their tissues. So you can kind of see the little tiny green things. That's algae living inside of their tendrils or their tentacles. And so the algae eat waste from the coral and provide them with glucose. Most of their food actually is provided by the algae. So remember, we were talking about endosymbiosis in the last unit. We were talking about endosymbiotic theory, how mitochondria and chloroplasts were probably individual organisms that end up, living inside of another organism or inside of cells in order to uh, not just provide for the host cell, but also for protection. That's kind of what the algae are doing. The algae are in here because it's a better protected place. They're not going to have to worry about getting eaten by a fish or something because fish don't really eat coral. And they are able to provide some nutrition. In fact, most of the nutrition for the coral simply by manufacturing glucose. And so rising ocean temperatures can cause stress. So when the coral is under stress, the algae is ejected from the coral, and that causes the coral to become bleached. So normally you have that Finding Nemo coral where it's like bright and colorful, but once they lose their algae, they lose their main ability to manufacture food, and you end up getting coral bleaching, which is where the coral becomes white, it starts to solidify, and then eventually the coral dies because it no longer has the ability to manufacture as much energy as it could because its little algae partner is gone. So, ocean acidification, let's talk a little bit about that. We have carbonates, CO3 2 minus. Again, this isn't very important because this isn't a chemistry class, but that is the chemical formula for carbonate. It is a natural ion found in the ocean. It is used by animals to make their shells. So clams and I just completely drew a blank. Oh, coral. There we go. They all make their little hardened shell out of carbonate. And so carbonate is in balance with hydrogen ions. And so when we say balance, what we're really talking about is an equilibrium. And so in a healthy environment, there is a lot of carbonate and there is not a lot of free hydrogen floating around. So you can see on this chart on the right side, red little dots represent hydrogen ions, and then green represent carbonate ions. You can see the carbonate is much more numerous than the hydrogen ions are. And so when we say balance, we don't mean that they're an equal amount. That's not what it means. It means that there is a state of balance between these. It just so happens the balance is that there's more carbonate than there is hydrogen. Now, the increase of CO2, right, due to human emissions, like, burning something, driving your car, if it still uses fossil fuels, right? That actually does manufacture more acid. And that's because when CO2 and water mix together, you end up making this yellow stuff, which is carbonic acid. And so this is actually what's going on. CO2 and water are combining together to form H2CO3, which is termed carbonic acid. Too much CO2 will actually cause carbonate to disappear and to dissolve. So you can see the more yellow dots there are, that is going to slowly but surely make more hydrogen ions. And the hydrogen ions are going to be reacting with these little kind of blue bicarbonate ions. Um, and so what we're ending up with are a massive decrease in carbonate ions. And so you can see there's a lot less green carbonate on this side than there is on that side. And that's partially because there's more bicarbonate, which is, kind of what I normally think of when I think of bicarbonate, I think of baking soda. Um, this is just a bicarbonate ion floating around on the opposite side because of the hydrogen concentration going up. And so here's how we dissolve carbonate. We take carbonic acid, you take carbonate, and what you end up making is bicarbonate. You end up making baking soda as a result. And so that's it. If you have any questions about that, again, this was a lot of chemistry related stuff, but if you have any questions, please let me know.